Hello, this is Jose Luis here at Parametric Camp, and welcome to another video in this mini series, how to use the Dall-E API to generate images from text. In this video, I would like to show you how to do that using the C# programming language. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a console application that is going to have some parameters, it's going to have like the prompt as a JSON file, etc., etc. And when we execute that, the system is going to ping the Dall-E API, is going to retrieve an image with the prediction, and is going to save them to the folder. And because we're going to create a console application, it's going to be something that you will also be able to use from your terminal. So if I clear the screen and I say Dall-E.API, I will be able to, from the terminal, to create this request and to download it to the system. And you can see that now I have these two images in my system, which are the request of these tiny cities that I just created. Also, because it's an executable file, you might be able to just share this with your friends, with your colleagues, and give them the option to generate images from their systems, okay? As you're going to see, the way we're going to do that is that because there's no API here for C#, we're actually going to be using the raw way of using the API, which is using HTTP post request in C#, okay? But I don't want to disclose much more. Why don't we just start doing this? It's going to be simple, it's going to be fun, you're going to love it. Let's take a look at how to do this. Beautiful. So let's start from the basics. So if you remember from my previous videos, and if you haven't seen them, then I'm going to remind you again. If we look at the documentation of the API, we can see that in order to create an image, what we need to do is we need to make an HTTP post request to this endpoint here, this URL. And what we need to do is we need to send in the body of the request, we need to send a JSON object with the parameters of what we want. So the prompt, how many images, the size of the image, etc. And you can see the documentation gives us examples of how to do this directly from the terminal using curl. And if you want to learn how to do this, I did this in a previous video, so you're welcome to, there must be a card and there will be links in the description here. We also have examples of how to do it in Python. I also made a video in this playlist before, and we also have examples of how to do it in Node.js. But as of the recording of this video, there's no example of how to do it in C#. I'm sure that very soon after the publishing of this video, there will be NuGet packages to ping the Dall-E API, etc., etc. But for the time being, the only option that we have is to basically craft on our own a lower level HTTP post request to this URL. What that's going to involve is basically figuring out how to make post requests in C# and then making sure that the request that we put together has all the necessary information that the API requires. And then when we get the response, to make sure to deserialize that response in a way that we can extract the information that we need. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to show you an example of how to do that with a console application in C#. But what you're going to be learning can be applied to a Windows Form application or anything that is C# based. So we're going to start by opening Visual Studio. And then in Visual Studio, I'm going to create a new project that is going to be a console app that is going to be based on the .NET framework. So I'm going to either click this here from my recent projects, or I'm going to find that here on the templates. I'm going to go next, and then I'm going to find the folder that I'm using here in this one that I have here in order to drop that here. And I'm going to call this Dall-E API, for example, or I'm going to, yeah, Dall-E API, for example. That's not, well, it's not a great name, but whatever. So I'm going to create a new empty project, and the project is going to be a console application. I'm going to scroll in. I'm going to console read key to make sure that I stop the program, etc. Read key, and this should be the good starting point. So I'm going to start this. I'm going to make sure that the window shows up on my screen because it always shows up where it shouldn't. So I'm going to let the system not position the window, and I got a simple console application. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to set up which are the parameters for my request. So first of all, I'm going to need to figure out where my API key is. I'm going to need to figure out where my endpoint is, and I'm going to need to figure out how to compose this JSON object for the request of the body. So let's get started. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to define a variable called URL, and that's going to be the endpoint that I want here. Okay. So that's going to be this here. Then I'm going to put it here and I have my URL now. Then the next thing that I want is my API key. So I'm going to call this the bearer token. It's kind of the fancy word for API keys. And then, as we discussed in previous videos, in the video where I was talking about how to get the key, it's very, very bad practice to just write your key here, because then if you save the code, if you version the code, people could take and steal your key. So very often what we do is we store that key as an environment variable in our system, and then we fetch it from the code. I explained how to store a bearer token on your systems. If you don't remember that, please check my video on getting the API key for Dall-E. So that there should be a card popping up somewhere. And then what we're going to do is in C#, we're going to do this by, we're going to retrieve that variable by going to the environment object and using the getEnvironmentVariable function, so that C# looks at the environment and tries to find a key, a variable with the name OpenAI API key. This is the name that I gave to my bearer token when I saved it in my environment. All right. And then I'm going to need to create the prompt. The prompt is going to be a little tedious. I'm going to copy this. Okay. And it's going to be a little tedious because it turns out that C# is not great at working with JSON files natively. So there's many ways I could go about this. If I want to do it the right way, I could use libraries, etc., etc. But because I just want to get the idea through, I'm actually going to go a little dirty. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write an inline JSON file, which is going to be the nastiest thing ever. But hear me out with this one. So I'm going to say the body of the request is going to be a JSON object. And I literally just copy pasted what I had. And now what I need to do is, because this is not valid C# code, what I need to do is basically turn this into a string. The way I would do that is by basically, I'm going to remove all the new line characters, correct? I'm going to remove all the new line characters, and then I'm going to wrap all of these inside of double quotes. But if you see, the problem is that JSON already has double quotes for each one of the keys and the values in my JSON object, which is also a problem. So what I need to do here is I need to escape the double quotes by using a / so that the code understands that I actually mean to have a double quote as a character, as opposed to meaning that I want to close the string. So I'm going to escape this, basically escape all the double quotes, except for the last one. The last one needs to be normal because I want to use them to close. And then what's next? And then that should probably be it, except for the fact that I want a nice, I'm going to be using the same message that I was using before, same prompt, an isometric view of a miniature city, tilt shift, bokeh, voxel, blah, blah, blah. Let me make sure that the string, that the body is working well. So I'm going to print this, and you can see that I have this JSON stringified version of the JSON file, which is looking good so far. And you can see that Visual Studio is already highlighting an intuition of the properties of this JSON object. Correct? Beautiful. So that is great. Now, what I need to do now is I need to do a few things. I'm going to need to prepare data for the post request. The first thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that this, which is a string, becomes bytes, becomes zeros and ones. I actually need to do this very, very low level in C#. So something that I need to do is I need to say, I'm going to create a variable called data, and the data is going to be a binary version of the body that I have here. So I'm going to say, I'm going to take the encoding object, which is an object that is able to exchange data between different formats. And for the ASCII, I'm going to say, I want to get bytes of something that has the form of an ASCII body. Okay. And then if I were to print this to the console, you will see that we will have something strange. So we would have this kind of array of bytes, correct? Beautiful. What else are we doing? The next thing that I'm doing is, for example, I'm going to prepare the actual request. In C#, making HTTP requests, it's a little tedious and verbose. You have to write a lot of code, but we could potentially just wrap this in a function or make it a bit more elegant. But I'm going to do this from scratch. So I'm going to create a variable that I'm going to call the request, and this is going to be a web request that I'm going to make, and then I'm going to create to the endpoint the URL that I have here. And just to make sure, I'm going to make sure that this is casted to an HTTP web request object, like this, okay? Therefore, beautiful. So this request, as you can see, Visual Studio is already recommending things that I would want to do. So the first thing that I also need to do is I need to make sure that the request has the right verb. So whether if it's just getting stuff from the endpoint or whether if I want to send information and then get a response that is a function of that information, that would be a post request. So I'm going to actually go here and say, yep, I want a post request. And then you can see that the next suggestion, this is great. Visual Studio 2022 is amazing. The next suggestion that is giving me is that you probably want to set the content type, and that is true. So I want to send the content type. I want to set the content type. And because what I'm going to be sending here is a JSON, so you can see that it already gives me a suggestion. Hey, yes, it's an application. I don't even know why I'm making this video. This thing is coding the whole thing for me. Okay, what is the next thing? Exactly. I want to set the length of this request. Literally, I just want to say that the length of the message that I'm going to be sending is going to be the length of how many bytes I have in the data object that I just created. All right. Oh my God, this is just so easy. And you see, this one is not right because I don't want to set the content type again anymore. Okay. The next thing that I need to do is, because the API is not open and free for everyone because I have a key, I have to, with my request, I have to authenticate myself so that Dall-E and OpenAI knows that it's me, it's not someone else, and then they know to bill me for the services and not someone else. So what we do here is we basically set what is going to be the authentication method. And what I'm going to say here is if the bearer token is different than null, so if it exists, if I do have a bearer token, then I will need to set credentials. So for example, those credentials are going to be system.net. And I'm literally copying from, because I never remembered this, I'm literally copying from my notes on the other side. I need to request that the expect 100 continue. I really don't know what this means. I'm going to be very frank. I don't really know what this means. And I also need to set the security protocol. So I'm going to set the security protocol, and that's going to be the prototype, the TLS12. So that's what I'm going to use to authenticate. All right. I don't think I need this. I think it's part of what I have already. And then for the request, I'm going to attach a couple properties. I'm going to say I need to pre-authenticate. That is true. And then in the headers of the request, I need to add attach to the headers, I need to attach my bearer token. In the case of Dall-E, it looks something like this. To the request, I'm going to, where are the headers? Headers I want to add, and I'm going to add a header that is going to have two parts. It's going to have first the authorization. It says I'm going to authorize myself, and the content of the header is going to be the word bearer, white space, and then it's going to be the API key. So that's going to be the bearer token. This is a very, very common thing to do when you're working with APIs that require a token to work with. Okay, so this is very similar to what we did also for the Python examples and for the Node.js example. Okay. Beautiful. Now, what is the next thing? Well, if we don't have a bearer token, then we don't need to authenticate ourselves. So the only thing that we need to do probably is that the request is going to have credentials that are going to be the standard credentials. So that's going to be credentials, credentials cache dot default credentials. Oh my God, Visual Studio 2022 is just so good at auto-completing stuff. Beautiful. So that's going to be authentication. Okay. Okay, all right. How are we doing? Well, now it's requesting a timeout. I'm not going to set a timeout. I don't want my request to expire because it's taking too long. Okay. And now what I need to do is I need to take the body and I need to use a stream to take all the bytes, all the zeros and ones, and send them to my endpoint via the HTTP request. The way that looks like in C# world is this. I'm going to use the using keyword to make sure that the stream that I generate is a one-off and that it gets shut down and cleared and garbage collected after, I have finished executing it. So I'm going to use using, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a stream, and that's going to be from the request, I'm going to get the request stream. All right. So that basically starts the stream. And then to that stream, I can start sending information. So I'm going to say stream.write, and I'm going to say, I want to write all the binary, all the bytes that are generated from 0 to the length of the message. So this basically takes the stream and starts passing all this information, starting at the byte 0 and ending at the last byte. So at this point, I have already sent the information to the HTTP request. And then at this point, what is probably happening is that I'm waiting for the endpoint to respond with some information. So what I need to do now is I need to write some, I'm going to actually perform request. And here I'm going to say retrieve response. Okay. What is that going to look like? What I'm going to do is I'm going to create now very similar to what I did here. Instead of a request, I'm going to create a response. Okay. And then web request, excuse me, HTTP web response, and then here I'm going to say from the request I want to get the response. Beautiful. I got my response, but my response I also need to use a stream to get the information from it. But before we do anything, let's just try if this actually works. So can I write to the console? Can I write request response or request response? And then, for example, one thing that we may want to take a look is does the response have a code, a status code? The status code is a number that tells me, for example, if it's 200, it means that everything went well. If it's 404, it means that the endpoint doesn't exist. If it was 400, it means that you're forbidden or unauthorized. I forget, but you can Google HTTP status codes and you can see a bunch of those. And something that I can also add here, for example, is going to be the description, or I think this is going to be fine. So let's just do this. So I'm going to run this. You can see that it's taking a little bit of time, but then eventually the response said okay. Okay, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to print this. It's going to take a little bit of time, but eventually I do get an okay response, correct? Yes, because remember, APIs and HTTP requests, they may take time. So that's why doing asynchronous for this is typically better. Anyway, so we got the status code, which is, I'm actually going to leave that on. And then from the response, what I need to do is I need to take the body of the response and I need to take it and fetch it, and so that I can use it. For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a very similar thing to what I did here. I'm going to create a stream and I'm going to read that stream. So for example, I'm going to call this response string, and that's going to be from stream reader. I'm going to create a new stream reader object, and then I'm going to get the response stream and then read all the way to the end. Correct. I love the autocomplete. I'm really liking it. And yeah, why not? Let's just print it to the console. Why not? And see if it works. Let's run this code. Are you excited? We are about to get something, hopefully, from Dall-E. Yes, nice. So we did get an OK response. We did get a JSON object, so I can now copy this. I can paste it somewhere, for example, in I can open a text editor and I can paste this, and you can see I can wrap it. And then, for example, I can click and see the image. Choo-choo! Nice, we're getting it. Okay, beautiful. Okay, well, if that's what we wanted, we are probably already done. But for the sake of completeness, and in order to make this example similar to the ones in the previous videos on this playlist, what I would like to do now is I would like to take the JSON response, so this blob of data, and what I would like to do is figure out how to take the image and how to save it to the system. So let me help you. Go and do that. The challenge in order to do this is going to be threefold, I think. First one is going to be, well, the response that we're getting is a JSON file, which is basically a really large string. So what we need to do is in C#, we need to be able to deserialize this large string into an object that we can get the created property from, the data property from, or the URL, the base64, whatever properties from in an easy way. So for that, we're going to be using a NuGet package that I'm going to be showing in a second. The second challenge is going to be, well, now we have the way we're creating the response now, we're getting an URL, we're getting a link to somewhere on the cloud that we can go and we can download this file. So we could go the route where we take the URL, we download the JSON, we take the URL, and then we create another request where we download that image to the system. But I find that version a little more tedious. So I'm much more interested in showing you another example where in the response, instead of taking an URL, what I would like to make sure is that the format that I'm getting, instead of being an URL, is a full base64 blob representing the image. Or in other words, all the pixels of the image that I'm getting encoded in base64 format. If you want to learn what that means, I explained that in my previous videos, so you're welcome to check it out. I think it was in the Python one, probably where I explained that. And if not, it was in the Node.js one. So what I would like to get is the actual information, and then turn that information into a bitmap that I'm going to save to my system. Okay, so those are going to be the 3 steps that I'm going to follow. So first of all, let me make sure that I have a way to deserialize JSON objects. The way that's going to be is that I'm going to use a module for that. I'm going to use a package. So I'm going to go to references, right click, manage NuGet packages, and then go to browse and literally type JSON here. And you're going to see that JSON.net is going to be, no, it's not the first one that shows up. JSON.net. Yes, Newtonsoft's JSON, 2.48 billion downloads. So you can see it's a very popular package. So I'm going to install this. Okay, I'm going to install this package. And then in my references, now I have Newtonsoft JSON, which is a very nifty library for working with JSON information. And I'm going to import it and use it here. So Newtonsoft JSON. All right. So now this library gives me deserialize JSON. There are multiple ways to use this library to deserialize JSON objects. I'm not going to get into the details. I could do a full live stream and a full series on that. But the way I'm going to do this is using a trick, which is taking the JSON string and deserializing it to a dynamic object. The idea here is that I don't want to have to define a class with properties and methods, blah, 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 and then ask Newtonsoft.json to match that JSON file to the structure of the class. What I would like to do is just turn it into a dynamic file, a dynamic object, so that it can have any properties or any methods. And therefore, it just makes things a bit more easier. So I'm going to declare a variable of the type dynamic. And if you haven't seen this, this basically means that the type of the variable can change throughout the lifetime of the execution of this program. And then I'm going to call this, for example, response JSON. And I'm going to say from JSON convert, which is part of, oh, see, look at this, it's already there. This is crazy. JSON convert, I'm going to deserialize this object into a dynamic type object, and I'm going to take the response string and deserialize it there. Okay. By doing that, let's take a look at what we get. I'm going to then print response JSON. Okay. And if I do that, I'm probably going to get some object with all the properties. So let me see what I get. Yes, so this was the string, and this is the JSON object that I have deserialized, which looks identical. But the beautiful thing is that now I can access its properties. So for example, I'm going to not print the string. I'm not going to print the full JSON. I'm going to print here from the response JSON, I'm going to print the created property. So when it was created. Now, not updated, I want to print the data. And then from data, I'm going to print just the first element. And from here, I'm going to print the URL from the first element. And from here, I want to print the URL property of the second element. Because this object is dynamic, I can just basically ping any property, because C# doesn't know if that exists or not, but it allows me to do that because it's a dynamic type. So I'm going to now, you see, and then I get printed the created object, the data object, the first URL, and the second URL. So this is going to be very useful to now fetch properties from the JSON object in a similar way that we would do in Python or in Node.js. So I'm going to hide this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. I'm going to create a new body, okay? And this one is going to be a little different. So this one is going to have only one object. Oh, I can have two objects, why not? And then the size, and then I'm going to add a new property that's going to be response format, and then another escaped double quote, colon, escape double quote, and this is going to be B64 JSON. And by doing that, if I may actually, so for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the data property. What you're going to see is that now the response is not going to be URLs, but it's going to be this like massive blob of characters representing, oh, you see, and it's actually taking a lot. Yeah, you see, all of those are the bytes representing the image. It's the actual data of the images, okay? Beautiful. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to take those blobs as strings and I want to convert them to images. So let me write a for loop here for int I equals 0, I is less than response, what is response JSON dot data dot length, or maybe it's count. Yeah, and then here, and then I'm going to say, let me take the base 64 blob. So that's going to be from the response JSON data, and then here the object with name b64 underscore JSON. All right. And what do I have there? And then what am I going to do now? I'm just going to print it to the console and see if it's working. Base 64. I'm going to reduce this to 1 so that I'm not overpaying for all of this. And I'm going to make this also smaller so that it's not such a huge blob. Okay, so I'm just going to request one small image. Let's see if I print the base 64 blob. I get the response, and you can see, and then if I scroll up, you can see that yes, it starts here, and it goes all the way down. And I could just scroll down and copy paste this into an online base 64 deserializer, and it would work. Okay, so I have that. Now what I want is I want to create a bitmap image, and then I'm going to call image, and I think I may need to import system drawing. Import using system drawing. Yes, so now I have system drawing here, correct. So now I want to now turn this base 64 into an image. So for that, I'm not going to go over that because it's not very difficult, but it's also part of not what I want to cover here. So for that, I actually am going to use this nifty piece of code that Dall Storhosen has written, which is basically this function that takes a base 64 string and converts it into a bitmap by just using a buffer, converting from one, using memory streams, and then just making sure that it handles the closing of all of these properly. It's not very difficult, but I'm just going to copy paste it from him. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to scroll all the way down, drop here a function, base 64 string to bitmap, okay? And then I'm going to call this function and I'm going to paste the base 64 blob. So this image is now a system drawing image. So I could, if you were on Windows Forms, you will be able to render this, you will be able to show it on the form, etc., etc. It's like a C# image, if you will. And then what I would like to do is I would like to save this as a file to my system. So similarly to the examples that we've done before, what I would like to do is I would like to write a file name, and the file name is going to be something which is going to be of the type, I want to call it image underscore, and then it's going to have here the timestamp, and then it's going to have here the number of the image. So for this timestamp, I need to figure that out. So let's call this Unix time. And then for the number, it's going to be the number in the iteration of the for loop. Okay. And for the timestamp, let me remember. So I'm going to create this Unix time. Okay. Yes. And then that's going to be from, I actually have it here. So I'm not even going to pretend that I'm bringing this up. I'm just going to use from the time object, I'm going to fetch the now property, convert it to seconds so that I don't have like decimals or milliseconds or whatever, and then turn it into a long integer. Okay. Beautiful. And then with the file name, then it's just as easy as image.save to the file name that I'm specifying. And let's just make sure that we also give some kind of warning like, hey, saving image to file name. Oh, sorry, file name. Beautiful. And I think with this, we should be fine. Are we ready to try this out? Let's give it a try. So I'm going to do two images here to make sure that two images that are small, and I'm going to run this, and then it runs. It's working, and I'm printing. Sorry, I forgot. Saving image to 1, and I guess the other message was hidden by the blob. Okay, so I guess, yeah, I'm not going to print this anymore. So now let's go and check out the files. So the files is going to be in C#. We have the project that I just created, Dall-E API. And this is the code that I'm working on here, but because when I hit start in debug mode, what Visual Studio does is that it compiles the console application. That console application gets compiled into binary debug. So you can see here, this is the console application. And then these are the two images that I just downloaded. So this one and the next one. And actually, if I wanted to run, because it's compiled now, I can just go, if I wanted to run this without Visual Studio, it's an executable file that I could share with anyone, right? So for example, from the terminal, I could just say Dall-E API. And what I'm going to get is, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get all the blob, and then I'm going to get the two images, okay? Beautiful. Just remember that if you share this with your friends, which is something that you could share for them to use, they will need to have, for this to work, they will need to have an environment variable on their system that looks like OpenAI API key, and they need to have their OpenAI key in their environment. If they don't, this thing will not work. Okay. Beautiful. Well, I think with that, that's probably what I wanted to cover today in this video. Just like we did in previous videos, because console applications take arguments, I could actually write something where I could type Dall-E and I could type the prompt and then I could type the number of elements and I could type the blah, blah, blah. But I guess at this point, I think I'm just going to leave that as an exercise for you, the viewer, if you want to have some fun trying this out. And in the meantime, I think what I would like to do now is I would like to move on to showing you how this looks like in other environments that are based on C#. And for example, the first one that we're going to try is how to make Dall-E API requests inside, for example, of Grasshopper. How about we try that? Let's do it. I'll see you on the next video, Dall-E API inside of Grasshopper. Bye bye.